Long-distance love sounds romantic, doesn't it? Late night calls, aching for someone across miles, whispering to yourself, if it's meant to be, distance won't matter. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Distance doesn't just test love, it changes it. And sometimes, without even noticing, you're not building a relationship, you're building a fantasy that only survives because real life hasn't shown up to challenge it. When distance enters the picture, imagination rushes in to fill the silence. At first, that feels comforting. You replay conversations in your head, reread old texts, and picture how your partner would react if they were right there beside you. But over time, that mental image starts to take on a life of its own. Without realizing it, you stop relating to a real person and start relating to a version of them you've carefully constructed in your mind. Everyday friction disappears in long-distance love. And it's in those friction-filled moments how someone handles stress after a bad day, how they respond when plans fall apart, how they act when they're tired or disappointed. That truth usually reveals itself. Instead, your connection lives in curated slices of time. Scheduled calls, polished messages, emotionally charged conversations that happen only when both of you are ready to show up. What's missing are the unguarded, unscripted moments, the very ones that tell you whether you're actually compatible. And so, it becomes easy to project your own values, desires, and needs onto the other person. If you're deeply empathetic, you assume they would be too, in real life. If you long for consistency, you believe they'll naturally offer it once you're together. These assumptions feel logical, even loving. But they're still assumptions, and assumptions are dangerous because they masquerade as facts until reality steps in and shatters them. Distance also shields the fantasy by softening contradictions. When your partner lets you down, it's tempting to excuse it. They're just busy. Stressed, the timing's off. The miles cushion the blow of behavior that, in person, might raise red flags right away. You convince yourself it's the situation, not their character. That's the problem. And slowly, you find yourself defending who they could be, instead of honestly seeing who they're showing you they are now. Then there's anticipation, the engine that keeps so many long-distance relationships running. You live for the next visit, the next reunion, the day you'll finally close the gap. Those future moments become lifelines. You endure the uncertainty of today because tomorrow feels so vivid, so full of promise. But anticipation can become addictive. You start living more in what will be than in what is. The relationship feels meaningful, not because of how it functions now, but because of how beautifully you imagine it working later. Over time, this creates a dangerous imbalance, deep emotional investment with little real-world experience. You might feel profoundly attached to someone you've never shared ordinary life with, never navigated laundry, day arguments, grocery runs, or quiet Sunday mornings. Your bond feels intense, but it's been built in an idealized, heightened space. And when intensity replaces reality, it can hide the most important questions. Do your values align? Can you handle life's messiness together? Are you actually building something that can last? The real reckoning comes when the distance finally ends. Reality doesn't knock. It walks in and makes itself at home. Suddenly, habits matter. Emotional availability matters. Communication styles matter, and the person standing in front of you might not match the one you've been loving from afar. That doesn't mean either of you is wrong. It just means the fantasy was incomplete. What you fell for wasn't a partnership. It was potential. Love needs real life to root itself. It needs shared routines, inconvenient truths, and presence that doesn't rely on scheduling or performance. Without those, fantasy quietly takes over. And by the time you notice, you might be more committed to the idea of someone than to the truth of who they really are. In long-distance relationships, effort doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. Because you're not sharing physical space, it becomes harder to see. There are no small daily gestures, no coffee left on the counter, no hand on your shoulder after a hard day, no silent acts of care woven into the fabric of ordinary life. Instead, effort shows up in texts, calls, plans, and promises. And that's where imbalance can grow. Slowly, silently, often without either person noticing at first. At the start, both people usually show up with energy and intention. Messages fly, calls feel meaningful, and there's a shared determination to stay connected. But as time passes, rhythms shift. One person begins rearranging their life, staying up late, clearing their schedule, making emotional space the relationship demands. The other may still care deeply, but doesn't bend in the same way. And because distance hides the details, this asymmetry doesn't feel alarming. It just starts to feel normal. What makes this so tricky is that effort often gets confused with availability. Someone might respond warmly when you reach out, enjoy deep talks, and say all the right things, but rarely initiate. They show up when it's easy, but vanish when life gets messy. And because they're kind in the moments you share, it's easy to miss how much of the emotional labor falls on you. Eventually, the person carrying more of the weight begins to normalize it. I'm just more expressive, you tell yourself. Asterisk, I'm better at staying connected. You focus on the good moments and ignore the pattern. Without shared daily life to offer contrast, you don't realize how much you're compensating. You're not just in the relationship, you're holding it together. Another reason this goes unnoticed. Long-distance love often rewards intention over action. Promises about the future, we'll visit soon, we'll close the distance one day. I miss you so much, asterisk, can feel like effort even when present. Day consistency is missing, but intention without follow-through is emotionally light. It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't carry the weight of real sacrifice. Over time, this imbalance shapes the emotional dynamic. One person grows hesitant to ask for reassurance, afraid of seeming needy. The other becomes comfortable being pursued not out of cruelty, but because the structure allows it. Distance makes it easy to receive love without fully giving it back, and when effort isn't consciously shared, it becomes unintentionally one-sided. The most subtle cost, it chips away at your sense of self-worth. When you're always initiating, adjusting, and waiting, you start to believe this is what love requires. You confuse endurance with commitment. You measure the relationship by how much you can tolerate, not by how seen, supported, or valued you feel. And because there's no clear breaking point, you keep going, hoping things will even out once you're finally together. But how someone shows up when it's inconvenient is often how they'll show up when life gets harder. Distance doesn't create imbalance, it quietly reveals it. And the longer it goes unaddressed, the more one person gives while the other grows used to receiving. Healthy love doesn't demand constant chasing or silent overcompensation. It feels shared, responsive, alive on both sides. When effort becomes uneven without you noticing, the real loss isn't the energy you've spent. It's the standard you slowly lower, forgetting you deserved more all along. One of the quietest dangers in long-distance love isn't conflict or loneliness, it's postponement. Emotional needs don't disappear when they go unmet, they just get delayed. And in long-distance relationships, delay often disguises itself as patience, loyalty, or understanding. Asterisk, it's temporary, you tell yourself. Once we're together, everything will fall into place. But feelings don't live in the future. They live in the present, and when they're consistently put on hold, they leave a quiet scar. At first, postponement feels reasonable. You miss touchy, but distance makes it impossible. You crave consistency, but life is complicated, so you accept gaps. You long for shared moments, but settle for talking about someday. Each compromise seems small. You're not ignoring your needs. You're just waiting. The problem? Waiting becomes a habit. Over time, emotional hunger shifts shape. You might still feel connected during calls, but oddly alone afterward. Loved in words, but not always in actions. Because distance explains every absence, it's easy to rationalize what's missing. Even when some needs could be met with consistency, presence, and follow through. Worse, you start lowering your expectations. You stop asking for what feels like too much. You learn to soothe yourself instead of reaching out. You hold back your insecurities not because they're gone, but because you don't want to pressure anyone. In trying to be low maintenance, you slowly become emotionally invisible. What you call strength is often just unspoken longing. Postponement also distorts your sense of time. You begin living in emotional installments, later, when we're in the same city later, when work calms down later, when life allows it. But relationships aren't meant to be placeholders. When the present becomes something to endure rather than live, the bond survives on hope, not nourishment. And unmet needs don't vanish, they accumulate. Small disappointments stack up quietly, turning into resentment you don't feel entitled to voice. You might overreact to minor things not because they're huge, but because they tap into a deep well of delayed longing. What looks like sensitivity is often emotion finally demanding to be seen. When distance finally ends, relief doesn't always follow. The habits of postponement don't disappear overnight. You might still struggle to ask for what you need, still minimize your feelings, still doubt your right to closeness. Or worse, you might realize the other person never learned how to meet those needs because they were never truly asked to. Healthy love doesn't ask you to put your emotional life on hold. It adapts, it communicates, it finds creative ways to meet needs, even within limits. Patience is powerful, but only when it's mutual and conscious, not when it quietly teaches you to live without what you actually require. When emotional needs are consistently postponed, the real loss isn't time or comfort, it's your gradual disconnection from your own truth. And no future reunion can fully heal a present that taught you to wait for love instead of receive it. Time holds a strange power in relationships. It deepens attachment, builds history, and creates a bond that can feel impossible to walk away from. In long-distance love, that power magnifies because time often becomes the main proof that the relationship matters. The longer you stay, the more it must mean something. And that's where the trap begins. At first, time feels like commitment. You count months, anniversaries, milestones, all as proof you're building something real. You remind yourself how long you've held on, how much you've endured. Time becomes your reason to stay, even as doubts creep in. Instead of asking, "Is this growing?" you ask, "How much have I already given?" That's when emotional investment turns into emotional entrapment. You've poured in hope, energy, vulnerability, and walking away would mean admitting it didn't lead where you hoped. So your mind resists. You focus on potential instead of progress. You tell yourself the distance is the real enemy, and everything will make sense once you're finally together. But time doesn't measure compatibility, it measures endurance. Staying longer doesn't guarantee a healthier outcome. Sometimes it just means you've grown used to uncertainty. You learn to tolerate gaps, unanswered questions, plans that keep getting pushed back. And because you've lasted this long, leaving starts to feel riskier than staying, even when staying no longer feels right. Long-distance relationships can also create a false sense of momentum. You're always moving towards something, the next visit, the next promise, the next phase. That forward motion feels like progress, but movement isn't the same as growth. True progress requires clarity, alignment, and consistent action. Without those, you can move for years and still end up nowhere. Yet the more time passes, the harder it becomes to question the path. There's also identity at stake. Over time, the relationship becomes part of who you are. Your asterisk, the patient one asterisk. Asterisk, the loyal one. The believer in love against all odds. Walking away then feels like failing yourself, not just the relationship. You don't want to be the quitter, so you keep investing even as the emotional returns shrink. Time also fuels hope. The more you've given, the more you need it to pay off. You dream of a future where all the waiting finally makes sense, a future where struggle becomes a beautiful origin story. But hope, without action to back it up, becomes a chain, not a compass. It keeps you tied to an outcome that hasn't proven it can exist. The hardest realization often comes in hindsight. So much time was spent waiting, not building, waiting for clarity, waiting for presence, waiting for alignment. Time didn't deepen the love. It just made it harder to leave. And that's the real risk, mistaking longevity for value. Time should strengthen what's already working, not convince you to endure what isn't. When time locks you into the wrong relationship, the cost isn't just the years you spent. It's the love you could have chosen, one that grew not because you waited long enough, but because it was right all along.